This is actually a different method to solve a quadratic equation. Remember, you can't use the previous method all the time, because if I gave you a problem like this one, x squared plus 6x equals 9, you can't use the previous method. That previous method only works when you have x squared equals a number, so if this piece is not there. So what would you do if this piece is here? Well, there's a couple of options. One of them we're going to look at is called complete the square. So how does complete the square works? So to complete the square here, the method we're going to use here, there are 3 steps to use. Step number 1, you need to find, again, complete the square. Let's say if you have something like this, x squared plus bx equals c, something like this. For anyone, I'm just going to use in general there. Find 1/2 of the coefficient of x. Of x. In this case, that would be 1/2 b. That's b here. 1/2 that number. Step number 2, square this value. Which value? The 1/2 b. Square it. And step number 3, add the result of step number 2 to the expression. Missed the O there. Yep. Since actually I have an equation, like in this case, when you have an equation, you really want to add it, the result, to, maybe I should say both sides of the expression. That's a better choice, both sides of the expression. Or add and subtract from one side. I'm going to say both sides of the equation. I'm going to change it. Of the equation. Remember, when you do anything to one side, you got to do the same thing to the other side. So that's why you have to add it to both sides. So let's take it and test it on that equation. X squared plus 6x equals 9. The first step, it says take 1/2 of the coefficient of x. The coefficient of x is 6. 1/2 of that means divided by 2. It's actually plus 6. Let's not forget it's a plus 6. Take the plus 6 divided by 2. What do you have? Plus 3. Let's square it. When you square it, that's what? That's a 9. So I'm going to add 9 to this side. Here we go. Let me use the red color here. And I'm going to add 9 to this side. That's how we complete. Now, how do we solve this problem? So this equation becomes x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 18. How is that going to help me? I just made it worse than that. Well, what's nice about this method, you should be able to factor this now. And if you factor it, that should be x. And if you're not sure what the factoring, look at that number. See that number in parentheses here before you square it? That's plus 3. This will be x plus 3 times x plus 3. And this will change to now what? X plus 3 squared equals 18. And what do you know? That looks like some of the previous one we did in the other video. Using the square root method that says x plus 3 has to equal to plus or minus the square root of 18. X plus 3 has to equal plus or minus 18 is what? 9 times 2. X plus 3 has to equal plus or minus the square root of 9, which is 3, the square root of 2. Now bring the 3 to this side, that becomes a negative 3. And it's negative 3 plus or minus 3 the square root of 2. So the whole idea of completing the square so we can make it look like this, so we can use the square root method. So you have two solutions. Negative 3 minus 3 the square root of 2. Negative 3 plus 3 the square root of 2. I know that was quick. We're going to do lots of examples here. You'll get it. So let me try another one, and I'm going to see. I'm not going to try to squish it all there. I'll take a full page for that. We're going to solve all of these by completing the square. Remember, to complete the square, we take the coefficient of x. In this case, we're using y, the coefficient of y, this one. Negative 6 divided by 2 and square it. What's negative 6 divided by 2? Negative 3. Square it, which will make it what? 9. So y squared minus 6y. Let me add 9 to both sides. Whatever that number is, I'm going to add it to both sides of the equation. So now let's factor this. That's y. Again, if you're not good at factoring, look at that number. What's that number? Negative 3. Y minus 3. Y minus 3. What is 7 plus 9? 16. Y minus 3 squared now, because you're multiplying by itself, equals 16. Now let's use the square root method. Y minus 3 without the square equals plus or minus the square root of 16. What is the square root of 16? That's 4. Take the minus 3 there. That becomes 3 plus or minus 4. So one solution is going to be what? What is 3 minus the 4? 3 minus 4 is negative 1. The other one, 3 plus 4, which is 7. Let's try another one. X squared plus 4x equals 21. Take the coefficient of x. Notice it's a plus 4. You see that plus 4? Take that number, divide it by 2 and square it. I keep putting the sign intentionally to try to help you with the factoring. What's 4 divided by 2? It's positive 2. Square it, that's a 4. So we're going to add 4 to both sides. So let me add 4 to this side, and let me add 4 to that side. Factor this one. That's x. Again, what's that number in parentheses? Positive 2. This is 25. X plus 2 squared is 25. x plus 2 without the square, that's plus or minus the square root of 25. Plus or minus the 5. Bring the plus 2 to this side, it turns to a negative 2. So here are my solutions. Let's see. Negative 2 minus 5, that's one of them. Negative 2 minus 5 is negative 7. And the other one, negative 2 plus 5, which is plus 3. Where this might not be really a fun method to use is when that number is not divisible by 2. So I'll give you an example. X squared minus 5x plus 3 is equal to 0. Let me move the plus 3 there first. When I move it, becomes what? Negative 3. Now take the coefficient of x, which is the negative 5, divided by 2 and square it. Well, you can't really divide that by 2. It's still negative 5 over 2. You can't simplify it. So when you square it, what's a negative 5 when you square it? That's 25 over 4. So I'm going to add 25 over 4 to both sides. So let me add here 25 over 4. I can still factor this using my cheat method. It's going to be x, and what's the number inside the parentheses? Negative 5 over 2. Now to add these, that's over 1. So you got to find the LCD, which is a 4. 4 times 3, that's negative 12 here. And this is positive what? 25. So x minus 5 over 2 equals, squared, I'm sorry, equals, what's negative 12 plus 25? That's 13 over 4. Positive here. That means x minus 5 over 2 without the square root should equal to plus or minus the square root of 13 over 4. The square root of 13 stays the square root of 13 over, what is the square root of 4? That's a 2. And the last step is we need to take the minus 5 over 2 to this side and make it a positive. Change side here. So that'll be x equals 5 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 2. Since these two are the same, the bottom is the same, you can make it one fraction. 5 plus or minus the square root of 13. So x equals, one solution is 5 minus the square root of 13 over 2. The other one, 5 plus the square root of 13 over 2. So you can see it's not really a great method to deal with when that number is not divisible by 2. So a lot of people will shy away from this method if that number is not divisible by 2. Is there another method? Yes, we will be looking at that next. But before we get to that, what happens if that number in the front is not a 1? All the examples I did to complete the square, that number was a 1 here, the coefficient of x squared. So let's take an example. Here we go. Solve by completing the square. Notice that number in the front is not a 1, so we need to fix it. How do you make that number a 1? You divide this by 2, divide this by 2, divide this by 2. When you do that, you end up with what? Y squared minus 8y equals 4. Now I'm good. That's a 1. I can use that technique. Take this number, divide it by 2, and square it. What is negative 8 divided by 2? Negative 4 squared, which is what? 16. So let me add 16 to both sides of the equation right here. Oh. Let me add 16 and let me add 16 to both sides. Now factor this one again, y, and what's that number? Negative 4 equals 20. Y minus 4 squared equals 20. Y minus 4 without the square equals plus or minus the square root of 20. Y minus 4, I can simplify the square root 20. 20 is 4 times 5. Y minus 4 equals plus or minus 2 the square root of 5. And the only thing I'm going to do here, because I can't solve for y minus 4, I need to take the minus 4 to this side. And if I take it to that side, this becomes y equals 4 plus or minus 2 the square root of 5. So one solution, y minus 2 the square root of 5, comma, 4. This is 4 minus 2 the square root of 5. The other one, 4 plus 2 the square root of 5. You have two answers. That's what y is equal to. Let's try one more. Nine x squared minus 9x minus 4 is equal to 0. I like that number to be at the end. So that's my first step. And again, to make that number a 1, I'm going to divide every one of these terms by 9. Let's divide by 9. So that will give me what? X squared minus x equals 4 over 9. Now let's complete the square. Remember, there's a 1. We just don't put it here. We're going to take that number, divide it by 2, simplify it if you can. Well, you can't really simplify it, then square it. What's a minus 1 when you square it? That's a 1. What's a 2 when you square it? That's a 4. So I'm going to add the 1/4 to both sides. So let me add 1/4 to both sides. Again, to factor this one, that's x minus 1/2, because that's the number is negative 1/2, x minus 1/2. And to add these, the LCD is 36. You need to multiply this by 4 to make it 36. 4 times 4 is 16. You got to multiply the 9 by 4 to make it 36. 9 times 1 is 9. X minus 1/2 squared equals 25 over 36. X minus 1/2 without the square equals plus or minus the square root of 25 over 36. X minus 1/2 equals plus or minus, what is the square root of 25 is 5. What is the square root of 36? That's 6. And finally, bring the minus 1/2 to this side, make it a plus 1/2. So x equals 1/2 plus or minus 5 over 6. Well, if you need to add them or subtract them, you need a common denominator, which is 6. You got to multiply this by 3 to make it 6. That's 3 over 6. So it's going to be, one of them is going to be 3 minus 5. 3 minus 5, that's negative 2 over 6. And the other one, 3 plus 5, which is what? 8 over 6. Simplify that, negative 1/3, comma, 4/3. Two answers. Negative 1/3, comma, 4/3. As I said, if this number is not divisible by 2, or that number is really a crazy number, completing the square is not the most popular method. Actually, if you ask a lot of students, probably the least popular method. So next class, you're going to learn a method that will solve any quadratic equation, and it's not, doesn't matter if this number is divisible by 2 or not. So you got to wait till the next video for that one.